Appreciate it. Mr. Chairman, members of council, I really appreciate being here. It's good to see you all. Happy rainy continuation of spring here in Portland after 3 gorgeous days. I guess it's funny, I'm going to laugh a little, Charlie. They talk about the administrator job, and I spent a little bit of time looking at the footage of the previous 2 times I came here. Once about 3 weeks after I became full-time administrator back in 2014, and then again in November of 2015. And yeah, there's definitely, there's an aging process that goes on. It's about 4 years of human aging for every year of administrator job. But it was funny, I actually promised myself after we finished the strategic plan that I would take a little break, and I got a really nice week off last week down in the sun, and and I came home on midday Saturday, and then Sunday morning I woke up, and I have 9-year-old twins, and we started out the morning with coloring and drawing, and then we had basketball games, and then it was Cub Scouts in the afternoon. And by about 6 o'clock at night, I was flat out exhausted, and I realized that my exhaustion has nothing to do with being a Bonneville administrator. It's all from raising 9-year-old twin boys. And so it's been a handful, but it's been really, really rewarding, and I've so appreciated in the partnership with all of you, especially the last few months, last year have been very consequential. There's been it's always, you go back in just the last few years, there's always so much happening. But I really feel, and I look back at the previous conversations we've had since 2014, and what's interesting to me is, lots of common themes. And I know, just having a chance to meet Richard yesterday and talking a little bit about it, many of us are sort of historians of the power business. And I think what's interesting about the Northwest is, and one of my favorite sayings is that history doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes, right? And I think that there are these patterns in our industry. And you go back to the 1990s when we had the first big outbreak of competition and gas prices collapsed, and Randy Hardy was the administrator, and huge sort of radical transformations of Bonneville, and the first big wave of customer diversification. You kind of look back to that era. There's a lot of similarities. But I also think that we sort of saw how that ended and how that went into the power crisis, and then sort of the post-power crisis era and the regional dialogue contracts, and we just have seen huge cyclicality in commodity prices and industry trends. But I do think that some of the forces that we're dealing with right now, particularly the proliferation of cheap natural gas and all the new renewables coming online, and continued relatively modest load growth, huge market transformation going on in the West, lots of new technology. I feel as though these trends are a little bit more enduring to a certain degree. And so I've kind of tried to look for what are the things that really are kind of bedrock to BPA. And I felt as administrator that I inherited a lot of really, really great stuff to work with in the organization. Lots of wonderful people, lots of history, lots of excellent developments over the years. And I kind of think as long as I've been at Bonneville, which is now about 16 years, we've always worked off of this vision statement of Bonneville as an engine of the region's economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. And we've also had a corollary to our vision and really our mission is that we are able to deliver on our public responsibilities through a commercially successful business. And those have always just struck me as just being sort of bedrock, sort of axioms of our reality. But when you look at what's been going on the last few years, with the pressure on our revenue streams, with the pressure on our cost structure, with the changes in the industry, the collapse in wholesale electricity prices, I think that the commercial pressures on Bonneville have become much more significant than we've experienced. I know you had, I think Steve Kern was here a few weeks ago talking to you a little bit about the market. I'm not going to go over all of that stuff, but certainly some of the points that he raised, I think were really quite accurate, that there is a lot of pressure on the cost structure. There's a lot of downward pressure in wholesale electricity prices. I would say, to be really frank, if there's an axis of sort of nonchalance to panic, I think it's important that we don't get into a panic mode. I'm not in a panic mode, but I'm in a very, very significant sense of urgency mode, and I do think that the risks facing Bonneville are real, and I feel that even though we've got 10 years left in our long-term contracts until 2028, that the time for action, and I think real action, is now. And when you look back at the conversations we've had over the last couple of years, what I feel good about today in terms of taking you through the strategic plan is that we've tried to really convert all of the thinking that we've done over the last last couple of years into sort of real measurable actions with clear metrics of the things that I think, and I think many of us agree, are necessary for Bonneville to take on in order to preserve its role in the region and achieve commercial success. And so what I was going to try to do, I think, I'm a bit of a believer in repetition. I know, spent time with pretty much all of you talking about our strategic plan in the process of developing it. And that's one of the things I like about it, is I think it really reflects a lot of excellent input from folks throughout the region. In particular, the states and the governor's offices, which was very important to me. But I think it's, now that it's finished, I'd like to go right through it. What I was going to do is I was going to go through each of the 4 sections. And along the way, I'll provide some comments that take to the heart of the recommendations in each area. And then we can kind of open it up for a few minutes of questions and comments for each section, and we'll move on to the next one with the goal of making sure that we end right at 2:45. So I will try to keep us on schedule. And feel free to interrupt me as we go through. But I think, as you know, there are 4 big strategic goals in our 2018 through 2023 strategic plan. And I will use I'll use the PowerPoint here. And the first is to strengthen financial health by meeting objectives for cost management, liquidity, debt utilization, debt capacity, and credit ratings. The second is to modernize assets and system operations to leverage and enable industry change. The third is to provide competitive power products and services. And the fourth is to meet transmission customer needs efficiently and responsively. And as you see in the plan, we say that, I really believe that acting on these goals is going to put Bonneville on a path to become more competitive and responsive to customer needs, modernize our assets and operations to leverage and enable industry change, and actually deliver on our public responsibilities through a commercially successful business. I think many of you know that I really have tried to bring some significant business acumen and focus on core financial fundamentals at BPA. We're not an appropriated agency. Every dollar we spend is collected from our customers, our power customers, our transmission customers. And so that focus on the customer, the focus on commercial viability, and on the message that we've heard very loud and clear the last couple of years is to focus first and foremost on cost management. The reality is that we signed the long-term regional dialogue contracts back in 2008, take-or-pay agreements for 20 years, and Bonneville's rates have gone up 30% since 2008. And I have heard it since the day I took the job, that we've got to get ourselves off of this unsustainable rate trajectory. I will tell you that today, with the PF rate at around $36 per megawatt hour and market in the $21, $22, $23 range, we are not strictly competitive on a pure price point basis. I would say that I still think there's tremendous value in the product. I think right now, when you unpack all of the different elements of the Bonneville product, you look at its carbon-free, dispatchable, firm, reliable, delivered components and everything else that comes with BPA, I still think it's a tremendously valuable product. But if that spread opens up more, I think we're going to look at some significant problems. And quite frankly, we've done a ton of analysis. I'm not going to put it all on the table today. Some of it's very proprietary, and I'm not going to put a big target on my back. But we've thought a lot about where we think we need to land the PF rate in the middle of the next decade to keep the bigger utilities on board who have some elasticity of demand, and to quite frankly make sure that our smaller requirements customers still see us as a competitive offer. And we've done a customer by customer analysis, extensive work, and we've used a lot of the council work. We've looked at gas curves, we've looked at forward power curves, we've looked at cost of new build resources, we've looked at everybody's integrated resource plans. We really have scrubbed that. But one of the key conclusions coming out of that analysis is that we do not have the ability to continue to grow Bonneville's aggregate cost structure in real terms if we're going to maintain our competitiveness. And so one of our first and foremost financial objectives in this plan really is around improving our cost management discipline and holding our program costs at or below the rate of inflation by business line. Now, at or below, certainly below will be better, but we're trying to draw a line and saying at minimum we can't be coming in with cost increases that are multiples of the rate of inflation as we have for a number of rate periods. It's just not acceptable anymore. And we've also changed our budgeting practices. You know, we got a lot of feedback from folks, customers and others saying, you know, you can't just kind of come in every rate period and say, hey, here's what we spent last rate period, here's a, you know, an escalation factor, et cetera, et cetera. We got to do a much tighter job of really budgeting and budgeting strategically, not only with respect to what we want to achieve strategically in terms of our specific objectives, but also really having a sense of where we need to land rates. And we are doing that now. As a matter of fact, I spent the whole morning today with our senior vice presidents and our chief operating officer combing through extraordinarily detailed analysis of our cost structure. And again, we're starting with our own stuff. You know, we're looking at our supply chain, we're looking at our personnel costs, we're looking at across the organization, our IT, of course working really closely with the Corps and the Bureau and Energy Northwest. But everything is really being evaluated, and it extends to the Fish and Wildlife Program, it extends to our energy efficiency program, really trying to be disciplined about our costs. The other thing that we're, you know, really foundational is we're trying to build greater financial resiliency. And you know, we can spend a lot of time on this, but at the end of the day, Bonneville, perhaps not surprisingly to some, is just a very highly levered entity. You know, we have, on average, we have a 90% debt to asset ratio at BPA. Our power business line is actually above that, and our transmission business line is on a trajectory to grow further. So we have to take steps now. We've heard it loud and clear from the credit rating agencies to lower our debt to asset ratio. We're targeting for the agency somewhere in the range of 75 to 85%. We've already had some good feedback about trying to tighten that up a little bit, maybe kind of putting ourselves on a more specific trajectory over the next 10 years. But we do want to delever. We're very highly levered relative to other utilities in the industry, one of the highest in the country, to be perfectly honest with you. There are, you know, certain reasons for that, but at the end of the day, it's really starting to nip into our flexibility to adjust to shock to the system. The second thing is we want to really make sure that we take a close look at our debt capacity. I think you all know that we have a limited amount of federal borrowing authority, about $7.7 billion. We've already used about $5 billion of that. And so we've established a goal of maintaining sufficient debt capacity to fund our capital program on a rolling 10-year basis and preserve $1.5 billion of available financing from the U.S. Treasury. This means we're going to have to look for additional sources of capital financing. And we're going to spend a lot of time talking with the region. We're going to be looking at everything from revenue financing and reevaluating our lease programs, talking to Energy Northwest, seeing if there are disciplined approaches to continuing leveraging the CGS asset, et cetera, and trying to figure out a way to increase our debt capacity. We're going to be retiring a lot of debt, but we're going to have to continue investing about $900 million a year in the system. And so we're going to continue to need to have good access to the borrowing markets, and we want to keep our cost of capital as low as possible. So that's a huge objective for us. And then, the third area is in just the general area of liquidity. And you know, it's tough for me to have to point this out, but you know, over the last decade, Bonneville has burned through about $800 million of cash, and that's through a variety of issues, you know, in terms of losses in the secondary market and trying to keep what would have otherwise been higher rate increases as low as possible. We are down close to zero in terms of cash reserves on the power business line. That is, it's an unacceptable position to be in there, you know. And so we've set a goal, again, I think a fairly modest goal, of maintaining at least 60 days cash in each of the business units. Right now, the transmission side is well above that. Power is right at the bottom. And we have to take steps now. We've heard this loud and clear from the credit rating agencies, and just to have the financial resiliency to ride through shocks to the system, you got to have some basic amount of cash. Again, at industry average, about 270 days. Okay, we're not talking about big, expensive transformations, but we're trying to do some minimum responsible level of financial management to get the balance sheet in better shape. And at the end of the day, also trying to make sure that we maintain our high investment grade credit ratings. And some of you who participated in our finance workshop last week, the week before last, heard from the folks, the rating agencies and others, telling us just how important it is for us to actually try to maintain that financial resiliency. So the financial elements are the starting point for the plan. They're kind of the basic building block to a certain degree, some of the constraints that we have to work with. And I just feel a tremendous responsibility as administrator to strengthen Bonneville's financial health and to try to take those steps. We will continue to do a lot of interaction with the customers. The fine details of each of these areas will be discussed through workshops and sorted out through our rate cases, but it's a big part of the overall strategic plan. So let me take a quick pause there on that segment, see if you guys have any feedback or thoughts or questions about the financial elements.
Richard.
Thank you for the first part of the presentation, and thank you for the meeting yesterday. As you stated, the bond rating agencies, the three primary ones, have all cited two primary issues. One, the volatility of the markets that you're in, and two, your very substantial debt-to-asset ratio compared to the rest of the industry. In fact, one of them even stated that if you were not Bonneville Power Administration, they would have probably recommended lowering the credit rating. One of the things in that debt side on the power side is still the underlying debts that are being paid off for projects 1 and 3. When I look at Columbia, it looks like there's an intent there to pay off that debt over what would be a normal period, what they've set, which is to pay it off by the end of the current licensure, which is in 2044. For projects 1 and 3, it looks a little bit unusual in the sense of on project 3, it's like they're paying a substantial amount of principal and then going to paying interest for a number of years only, and then on project 1 just paying interest only for a number of years. It would start to question the intent there of whether the intent there is to actually pay them off during that maturity date. And because they set the maturity date of trying to retire both of those by 2028. Is there going to be more specificity once you get deeper into the finance plan? Because probably, although you face a lot of upward pressures on the transmission side, if you're trying to remain competitive in the long term, getting the debt-to-asset ratio down in power is probably critical.
Yeah.
So
That's, I take your basic point, and we really agree with that. The power business line actually is on a relatively good glide path of reducing its total debt by about 1 percentage point every year. So it's moving in the right direction. We're amortizing a little bit more than we're taking on in power. It's actually transmission right now that's on the upward slope. The questions you're raising about the nuclear debt, I think, are also very appropriate. I think we're going to be spending quite a bit of time talking with the customers, talking with the Energy Northwest Board, talking with others about, okay, we've had some great experience here in the last couple of years. The regional cooperation debt was actually extraordinarily helpful, quite frankly. And you know, there are questions about working with that bundle of debt in a responsible way versus working with it where you're maybe seen as, you know, punting the can down the line or, you know, financing groceries. We need to be really careful that we're being disciplined, but at the same time, it's a huge obligation on our books, and it has provided some financial flexibility. So we're trying to find that balance point between leveraging it as a usable source of financial savings versus trying to get it completely off the books. Yeah.
And so, Mr. Mainzer, you are anticipating in the development of the remaining portions of the financial plan some more specificity.
Absolutely. Yeah, much more.
Mr. Chairman, thanks, Elliot. You know, you mentioned that one of your focal points and concerns was about the large customers, and obviously if a large customer were to find a better deal than Bonneville, that would be a disaster for, you know, kind of a downward spiral. But I was thinking about what happened in the mid to late 1990s when Bonneville was also kind of facing great competition with others, and it wasn't so much a loss of the big utilities as customers of the big utilities. It was the industry, and they were looking around and they didn't have the long-term commitments that the utilities had. They needed to survive the next year or two in their businesses, and if they could get a deal, and they didn't need 50% lower, you know, if they get 5-10% lower. So I was wondering if that's another danger, if you're looking out for that kind of problem as well.
It's not something that we were looking at down the horizon. It's happening right now. I think the reason you had Steve Kern in here, you know, a couple weeks ago is he's probably one of the utilities that's feeling it most acutely, you know, with NORPAC there in Cowlitz. So that is a dynamic that is for real. So that's why I say for folks that think that there aren't, significant loads, whether or not it's the whole utility or it's a subset of big industrial commercial demand that are going to be looking to get off the market if we're not competitive. It's happening, it's for real. We are going to enforce our long-term contracts. Okay, they were negotiated in good faith through a regional process with a lot of transparency. We have no intention of walking away from them. But anybody that thinks that there aren't legitimate, significant amount of load that could walk away, even if they're not looking for 20-year contracts, is not recognizing the reality that's at play right now. Yeah, good questions. Anything else on the financial plan? Any questions? Anything that's striking you kind of at odd or out of bounds?
We're good. Quit stalling. Let's go on with the rest of it.
Quit stalling. Right on. Let's go to objective 2. Okay, so an organization of our size and scope has got to be really, really, really good at asset management, right? You got to be literally just world class. We got to be like the best. And we have worked really hard in the last couple of years, including stealing just an incredibly capable fellow from the Army Corps named Bill Leedy. I don't know if you guys have had a chance to meet Bill, who now reports to our Chief Operating Officer as a new agency asset manager. And we are administering, I think, and making a lot of progress in really administering an industry-leading asset management program. And that extends across power, transmission, fish and wildlife, information technology, and facilities. And we're really trying to put each of these asset categories on kind of a consistent economic playing field so we can kind of know the relative value of the different investments so we can make good capital allocation decisions. We're trying to do a much better job of getting a handle on asset condition and being willing to ask hard questions about certain assets and saying, hey, are these economically viable? And I think those are the things we need to do to make sure that we're making the right investments at the right time. I think we're making a lot of progress, but that is just absolutely essential to our strategic plan, the caring and feeding of this incredibly valuable hydroelectric system, that transmission grid, 15,000 miles of transmission lines, control centers, warehouses, and then again, all the fish and wildlife facilities and IT. So a lot of focus on administering a world-class asset management program. And then the other area, which I think is kind of been a major focus of mine while I've been at BPA over the years, is this focus on modernizing federal power and transmission system operations and supporting technology. We have, for a number of years, we talked about this as our commercial operations work. We've now kind of just adopted the standard terminology around grid modernization, and folks say, well, what does grid modernization mean? And I want to just give you just a little bit of a glimpse, because for Bonneville, what grid modernization means is, for starters, before we even start talking about the new markets, today on our hydroelectric system, we have huge opportunities to better automate so that we can actually participate in the sub-hourly scheduling markets, so that we can actually enable more dynamic transfer. We want to automate our processes and practice, get away from spreadsheets, be able to work in a much faster moving system. We also have to have much greater visibility to what's actually happening on the grid, right? Things are moving faster, they're moving in different ways, the flows are different than they were, even just 5 years ago. So having that visibility into what's actually happening on the power system in terms of your reserve obligations and your loads and what's happening on transmission flows is very important. And then, of course, accuracy. You really want to be able to forecast things as accurately as possible so that if you want to get into new markets or you want to be able to sell new products and services, you have a good handle on what your inventory of both power and transmission. We think we can save a lot of money by investing significantly in these forms of grid modernization. The other thing, of course, we're taking a look at now, after sort of sitting on the sidelines for the first few years of the Western energy imbalance market, we are now dotting the I's and crossing the T's on our own business case for Bonneville participating in the energy imbalance market. We have developed a business case. I would say it's an affirmative business case. We've begun the process of sharing it with some of our customers and beginning to discuss what it means. And I think over the coming months, we're going to start engaging further with customers and other folks in the region and starting to sit down with the California Independent System Operator and looking at what the terms of entry might look like for BPA, both in terms of processes and in terms of costs, so we can sharpen that up. And then over the coming months, try to get ourselves to an actual decision node about whether joining the Western EIM is actually the right thing for BPA. I think we have some positive signs. Obviously a complicated issue, lots of opinion. But I think it's really important. Bonneville has always been a major player in the Western energy markets, and I think as we've watched Puget and Portland General and Idaho Power and now PowerX and the other investor-owned utilities in California get into that market. I think it's important that we make a decision one way or another and not sit on the sidelines. So that's going to be a big issue. That's also a core element of modernizing our assets and system operations. So let me see if you guys have any questions on that area. Probably nothing too unfamiliar to you. Any specifics?
Tom?
So that's new to me about the potential for Bonneville in the EIM market. And I was just wondering, are there special conditions that Bonneville would require being a PMA, or is it kind of just like Seattle or any other utility?
You know, I think there will be certain specific conditions, I'm sure. You know, we have unique statutory obligations. I think the way that we would unbundle the system to sell would be questioned, metering requirements. Obviously, we're not going to take on a bunch of incremental FERC jurisdiction by participating in the market. We'll look at our transmission tariff, et cetera. So there would be some special terms and conditions, I'm sure, but we don't see any kind of fundamental red lights from a legal or statutory perspective that would prohibit us from participating. You know, we've seen other PMAs participate in SPP, et cetera, and so I think that there's some opportunity. But again, this is going to be, you know, this is the first step of the conversation. We want to share information about what that business case looks like, conduct the due diligence, and then kind of come back to a decision note. And I think it's important that we give people some visibility and better understanding on how we see the economics playing out.
Thanks.
Mr. Administrator, the utilities that you mentioned that are considering or to join the EIM CalISO market, those folks are going there with an idea of discussing day-ahead market instead of just within the hour market, or having a provision to be able to do that when they all arrive down there. So a day-ahead market to you would be advantageous, I would think.
It's certainly something we're going to want to look at, and it's probably going to be the kind of thing that could develop even quicker than when we would get into the EIM. But if Bonneville elected to join the energy imbalance market, it would take us quite a while just to get technologically enabled. But we will watch that as well. And certainly, I'll be, you know, from a hydro supplier's perspective, the day ahead is actually a better time step to a certain degree. It allows us to set the hydro system better up. You know, when we'll come back to this in the next segment, but we've worked hard with the California ISO to get a flex capacity market up and running so that we can sell hydro flexibility, and we've specifically tried to structure that on a day-ahead basis so that our hydro operators can set the system up hydrologically to sell capacity. So it's something we're definitely going to watch. I would say if we take that first step into the EIM, you know, that's the thing we're kind of focusing on first, just getting into the sub-hourly 5-minute market. Okay, so I'm not going to stall anymore. Keep moving here. Strategic goal 3 is providing competitive power products and services. I think many of you have seen this graphic. I'm not going to spend a bunch of time on it. I alluded to it conceptually at the beginning, but certainly that is the trend that we've been facing of the nominal priority firm and rates and where the markets have been going. I mentioned, obviously, as a starting point, the cost management discipline and the budgeting is going to be really important, but we know that we're not going to exclusively cost manage our way out of this problem. We're going to have to look at the revenue side of the equation as well, and that's why we've been putting a lot of work into what we call Strategic Objective 3A, which is to increase power revenues through new market opportunities for clean capacity. And I think many of you know that our biggest foray into this was just announced last week in our 200 megawatt transaction with the Portland General. I wanted to actually thank the council in many ways for laying the groundwork for that. I think the 7th plan very clearly pointed out that the region should try to make best use of its existing resources. I think there was some good decisioning. I give a lot of credit. I think Maria Pope and her team at Portland did a really nice job of kind of pivoting very quickly, looking at the market. We were able to get our teams together and figure something out. I think it's a real win-win, but that's exactly the kind of thing we want to be looking for. And so we'll be looking, I think, for 2 reasons. You know, first of all, everybody knows we've taken huge hits in the secondary revenue market, just like every other hydro provider up here. You know, with the cheap gas and with the low load growth and the oversupplied conditions, it's been a bloodbath for folks in the wholesale market. And so looking for opportunities to monetize clean capacity, whether it's up here, whether it's down in California, and to try to grow that market over the next 5 to 7 years. That in itself is an important hedge for us in terms of continued decline in spot prices, which could well continue. But obviously, I'm also wanting to make sure that as we go into the next round of contractual negotiations, that if we have significant diversification from BPA, that we've grown the demand curve for some other products and services. Now, those products and services are going to be subject to the same laws of competitive dynamics that the publics will be looking at. So we can't think that this is going to solve all of our problems. And quite frankly, my goal is to try to resubscribe the federal system to the public power utilities for the next round of contracts. If we turned around and resubscribed the hydro system, the firm capability of the publics for another 20 years, that would be a massive accomplishment for us, and that's our base case. But we want to make sure that when we go out to resubscribe the system, that there's a pretty long waiting list for others that might like a piece of the apple. And so growing these markets, and whether it's the IOUs or looking at some of the new technology service providers, California flex capacity, qualified community choice aggregators, we're going to be out there and we're going to compete for business. And we're going to try to be a good business partner with dispatchable clean resources that can play a major role in helping this region meet its carbon objectives, and being a part of the clean energy economy. I think that the hydro system plays a big role there. And so we're very, very active in this market. And quite frankly, as a federal agency, we don't lobby. We don't take explicit positions on bills in the states, but we're watching very carefully what's happening in clean energy legislation in the Northwest. It's very interesting to us. And we tend to believe that policies that decarbonize, if we're going to go down a decarbonization path, starting just focusing on Oregon and Washington, all the things that are at play, we'd like to see policies that obviously have a place for the hydro system, and they're trying to accomplish these goals in a least cost perspective. So watching what's happening in the carbon tax perspective is very interesting to us. We're also going to raise our hands when necessary when we think reliability issues need to be better understood, like we did recently up in Washington. So we're trying to be very constructive. I think our track record is that we've done a ton to help enable renewable resources in this region. We're going to continue to be that partner, but we want to also support rational clean energy policy that has a place for existing resources and supports the kind of transactional activity we did last week. The third area, which we know we could spend all day talking about, is prioritizing fish and wildlife investments based on biological effectiveness and mitigation for FCRPS impacts, and managing our fish and wildlife program costs at or below inflation, inclusive of new obligations and commitments. So this is probably, at the end of the day, one of the toughest patches that I've, find myself in. These are very, very controversial issues, very, very important. But I really honestly believe that we are facing a point where Bonneville does not have the capacity to just absorb higher and higher aggregate fish and wildlife costs. If we're going to take on new obligations, if we're going to be looking at spill on the river, and we're going to be taking on new costs, we've got to be willing to work together to reprioritize our investment portfolio to manage aggregate rate impacts. And this is one of the areas, quite frankly, where I think the council and Bonneville really have shared responsibility. We're going to have to work together. This is tough conversations, but we've got to be willing to take a hard look at what we're spending money on. And make sure that we're really getting the biggest biological returns we can, and that we're willing to look at the portfolio of investment and make some changes away from things that are not consistent with where we're headed. And this is going to involve a lot of dialogue with the states, a lot of dialogue with the tribes. I have been, I think, pretty transparent that I think that there were, some real benefits of the fish accords. I think the relationship elements with the tribes are very important. I think investing in tribal communities is a very important and big important goal and responsibility for Bonneville and the other federal agencies. The relationships and the partnerships with the states have been really, really valuable. But we've got to be willing to make sure that as we're looking at future rounds of investment, that we're being disciplined, that we're being focused, we're investing on things that are consistent with our longer term strategy, and that we're willing to do the hard work of reprioritization. You know, Brian Mercier, Lori Bodie, you know, my team there, you know, they're having to really roll up their sleeves and work with many of you to figure out how to do this. And I just want everybody to know that I really support that work, and we're going to have to do it here. And I want to, you know, I want to particularly thank many of you. Certainly, you know, as we've worked with Washington State, Guy's just been an incredible asset to this conversation. You know, Idaho, the partnerships, Bill, and you know, Tim's been in Montana, and Jennifer. All of you have been really helpful, and I want to continue to look, quite frankly, for ways to reach out to Oregon and to get into a better place with the state of Oregon. You know, I do not like the fact that we're still sitting there fighting in court with Oregon. We have far too much in common with the state in terms of our long-term decarbonization objectives, so much work on energy efficiency, so many common shared interests, and to the fact that we're still sitting there sort of, you know, on the opposite sides of this issue it doesn't make me happy. I think it's something we've got to take on. I'm hoping all of us can come together and try to figure out how to bring all 4 states together around a long-term sustainable strategy for the river. So that's a big deal, huge priority for me. I will be massively focused on that in the balance of my time at BPA, I'm sure. The next one is Objective 3D in the plan, which is also, again, been I think a very challenging but important conversation, is to ensure that our energy efficiency and demand response investments are aligned with the long-term needs of Bonneville and its customers. And so, you know, I spent about 2 years after I became administrator really getting myself up to speed on the energy efficiency program. And it's obviously one of the most important issues. I know how important it is to the council. I've been schooled by Charlie and the team for many hours. I know all this, you know, how important this is to the states. I think the accomplishments in energy efficiency are amazing. But again, I do think we need to take a pretty solid business focus and pragmatic look at what makes the most sense for Bonneville to be investing in. And actually, I wanted to pull up, I know Kim Thompson was here several weeks ago speaking to you, and I thought that she had articulated some language that I think she shared with you that I wanted just to reiterate, because I know that there's always this concern that Bonneville is backing away from energy efficiency. That is not the case. And I think that our actions in terms of meeting targets and performance speak to the fact that we're all in. You know, I tend not to paint all of our public power customers with the same brush. I think many of them, if not most of them, are passionate about energy efficiency. They've asked for some more flexibility. They think that there's some rigidities in our programs in terms of, and also some concerns about how West Coast priorities sometimes get translated into the interior. I think those are fair concerns. We've tried to provide some self-funding flexibility and make some tweaks to the program. But I think generally many of them see the value. And I have tried to continue to carry the flag for energy efficiency at BPA, and I will continue to do that. But as Kim has said, you know, we can't assume that Bonneville's long-term needs are a load share-based carbon copy of the region's needs. It's appropriate for Bonneville to understand what is unique to our system, our customers, and our obligations. The conservation potential assessment, DR potential and barriers assessment, and load forecasting improvements and resource program enhancements are all vital tools in realizing Bonneville's strategy. So I've really appreciated, and I think our teams are working really well together. We are just trying to kind of drill in and really understand what's going to deliver the most value in terms of extending the life of the federal system and delivering value to our customers. It's not walking away from energy efficiency. It's just trying to be really knowledgeable and focused, again, to get the biggest bang for the buck out of our investments. So I think these are important conversations. Once the resource program results are out, I know we're coming up on the last couple of years, the 7th plan. I think we'll have some dialogue about what they mean. We're going to continue to work really closely with all of you in a collaborative format. But let's have the conversation. Let's see if these things tell us anything different than what some of the assumptions we've been working on, and be willing to have that conversation. And then the last area,
Mr. Administrator,
sir.
could you delay for 1 minute? Tim has an urgent question he wants to ask.
Okay. Happy to
I
take
don't
it.
know that it's urgent, but I do want to ask it while we're talking about energy efficiency. I mean, I think you touched on, Mr. Administrator, I think there are lots of reasons to like energy efficiency, but really from, when I think about it, and I hate to sit here and channel member carrier that sends off warning signals in the back of my head, but
It's not so bad.
I know that's what you think.
Go ahead.
It's really about, it is about wringing more efficiency out of your system. And when I think about or look at the contract that you just signed with PGE, I think there must be a connection to the efficiency that you wring out of the system, the more space that you create for yourself to do creative deals like that, that it gives you more room for that. And so in some ways, I think, I'm hoping that when you say, looking at the long-term needs of BPA, you're also thinking about your ability to free up your resource to give you more flexibility to generate revenue in a challenging market.
Yes, I think that's true. Obviously, one of the things we're looking at is trying to make sure that those revenue opportunities are recovering our costs of the investment, right? I mean, certainly, if we're going, one of the things I really like about the Portland-style deal, or looking at others, is that, you know, if we can see some actual increase in the value of clean capacity, and it can be monetized in a way that actually has a positive return, then the incentives will really be there. When you're not getting that value out of it, you know, the short-term economics are problematic.
Mr. Chairman.
Follow up.
Let's follow up. And that obviously then highlights the importance of the California market and being able to provide resources into the California market at a price that reflects the fact that they are carbon-free and clean.
Yeah, I think that, you know, certainly the California market will be one, but we'd like to see the same, certainly, you know, certainly to see similar opportunities materialize in our own backyard.
Right.
You know, that's our first place we go, you know, looking for transactions. You know, so certainly California's part of it, but you know, the value's got to be there. And again, I've taken the long view, and I really do think you need to take the long view. And also, we need to be willing to look at things like you know, we're also a little bit tied by our own, you know, our rate design, the way we administer the program. I think these are things that people think about coming into the next round of contracts. How do we want to, you know, is everything on a pro rata basis? Do you want to do it that way? Again, I mean, look at what we do with the I-5 corridor. You know, Portland, Vancouver, the southern side of that system is going to need a lot of demand response, a lot of load management, and those. So you're really looking for places where do you get return on investment, right, and tangible customer value. I think that's what we're really looking for. But great questions. So the last point in this segment before we move to the last is modernizing the Columbia River Treaty, which has been far and away the slowest moving initiative I've been involved with as my time as administrator. And I'm afraid that the tweet that went out this morning about Mr. Tillerson may not help in terms of continuing to move things forward in the State Department. You know, it's just been very, very, very tough to get traction back there. And of course, with all the tariff issues and things like that, it's hard to tell how the Canadians will react. We were getting some really good momentum. We had our negotiator, the Canadians had their negotiator. We don't have the next meeting on the calendar yet, so we're watching very carefully, but certainly to the extent to which we can get some economic rebalancing in the treaty, and we can actually sort out the long-term flood risk management protocol and create some room in a disciplined fashion, which I know is a concern to others, but really try to find some room for some flow-og and be able to sort of capture the things that we've been doing on the ecosystem side on a permanent basis will be helpful. So we remain committed to the regional recommendation, and we're hoping that this will get some traction, but it has been moving very slowly, and I think we've had, 3 delegation letters, countless visits back to DC, and it's still moving a bit slowly. So, okay, so those are some good questions. Anything else on the questions on the power side before I move to the final segment? Did I cover everything? Okay, good. So the fourth area fourth goal is to be able to meet transmission customer needs efficiently and responsibly. It sounds so basic in a certain way, but it involves a lot of change for a number of reasons. And I would say that, you know, Bonneville's transmission side, quite frankly, has been one of the most illustrious transmission providers in the country, if not the world. You know, if you think about the number of things that have been invented by Bonneville over the years, leaders in the region, with respect to high voltage DC transmission, and just an unbelievable network. But I would say it's been for many years it was kind of you could think of it as a bit of a gold-plated system, and it was very engineering-centric. In the commercial side of the business, and the customer side of the business, and this notion of responsiveness and efficiency and agility were not necessarily big parts of the culture within transmission. And actually, perhaps not surprisingly, our customers have been raising a lot more concerns about transmission service over the last couple of years, for a number of reasons. Some of them are experiencing economic development opportunities in their service territories. When you get Facebook or Apple or these companies coming in that want to bring jobs to these communities, they got to make sure they got transmission capacity. These companies show up on Monday, they want transmission capacity by Friday. Well, transmission system doesn't work that way. So getting ahead of the curve and being able to be responsive to those types of requests, and it gets back to being that engine of economic development. We want to enable these new loads, but you've got to be able to get the transmission capacity available. The other thing is that we know how incredibly expensive building new lines is, right? And I think what you saw out of us last year in the big decision around I-5 signaled a shift to a certain degree in our thinking about how to actually meet transmission service requests. You're not always just going to run to the big new build as the solution. And so our first objective is to address load service, congestion, and new transmission service requests by using flexible, scalable, cost-effective, and efficient solutions. This opens up all kinds of new opportunities for demand management and new technology to help meet transmission service requests. I want to be really clear, it does not mean the end of transmission construction. Okay? We will continue to need a robust grid, not only for reinforcements, but there will be opportunities and requirements to expand the system in certain places, and it will make sense. And I don't want people to think that that signals especially for Bonneville, the end of transmission construction. But you want to have a deeper toolbox, and you've got to be willing to look at the non-wires alternatives on an equal playing field with the big builds. And then you need to be able to use redispatch, flow control devices, battery storage where appropriate and economical, and just the generating capability of the system to manage a transmission grid more efficiently and more responsibly. So that is going to become central to the way that we run the transmission grid. The second area is really focused around transmission planning. And the objective is to develop and implement policies, pricing, and procedures for regional planning that incentivize grid optimization and efficient regional resource development. This really has two principal pieces. I think, as states and regions look at attracting new economic development, if you're going to bring big loads in, there are places where it makes sense to site new loads because you can take advantage of existing transmission capacity, deliverability, and there are other places where it's going to be really tough to get a new big load in because of transmission congestion or other reasons, or costs. And so we want to try to be able to convey information to states and folks on the planning side about what makes sense in terms of location of generation resources, load resources, and do a better job getting ahead of that curve with our customers and with others as well. And then also trying to send price signals to where are rational places to be locating these new resources. That's again going to be kind of a big change for us. And then also working more closely with the other utilities so that we can plan the system and expand the system and line up the subscription processes with transmission expansion and capacity enabling more efficiently. Right now, anybody that gets in these big long transmission queues to try to participate in RFPs gets themselves into all kinds of do loops. The utilities want delivered power. Well, they can't commit to delivered power unless they know they have a contract. They won't commit to a contract unless they know they have transmission. And so trying to get ahead of some of these fugue loops that exist in the transmission planning and subscription process. And actually out in Montana right now, the process that we're taking on to look at renewable resource development in Montana is trying to take on some of this. It's kind of a really good test case, quite frankly, for how do you actually open up a region, take advantage of existing capability or emerging capability, but also line up the commercial needs of the buy side with the commercial needs of the developer side to make sure the transmission providers are playing their role, but not getting themselves in a stranded cost perspective, right? So a lot of kind of a real-time conversation about that. The objective 3 in this section also talks about just a little bit of a highlight. I won't go too far into detail, but I'm trying to make sure that we're meeting the needs of network integration transmission service customers through clear business practices and streamlined processes. The open access transmission tariff serves load serving entities, many of our public power customers and some of the IOUs under network integration transmission service. And we have struggled over the years to really try to clarify the rules of the road for NT service and to really do good forward-looking planning, to use those resources to help manage our grid more efficiently, and just to make sure that folks can get their current and future needs met as efficiently as possible. That's been very important to our public power customers, and we want to try to really double down on that. And then finally, we have taken major strides and have a major initiative underway to offer more standardized products and services by better aligning Bonneville's open access transmission tariff with pro forma and industry best practices. And so, we've struggled over the years. We're not FERC jurisdictional in terms of our tariff. We don't have a pro forma tariff. We have tried to figure out the right way to strike the balance between being consistent with the pro forma versus balancing our other statutory obligations. And we're saying to ourselves, look, we think that most of the elements of the pro forma tariff can work for us, and we don't want to be the exception to every rule. We want to basically be able to provide clarity and to be able to standardize our products and services and to be a little bit more disciplined around them. Certainly if we find things in conflict with our statutes, we'll call them out if deviations are necessary, but we're going to take that on and at the same time have to watch how the industry is evolving so that if there are elements of the pro forma tariff that conflict with the emerging markets, that we can adapt to those as well. But this is a really important, I think, initiative for Bonneville. I think it's very important to many of our transmission customers. It raises some tricky issues, but it's something that we're really committed to taking on. In the last couple of things that I'll mention, I'm not going to go into detail, but I think if you have a chance to peruse the plan, we've really tried to focus on a set of key performance indicators for the business that we're really going to manage to, everything from safety and reliability right down to our financial performance. We are now running a new quarterly business review format. I've kind of transitioned that format to a little bit more like an investor-owned utility earnings call. I will be personally participating in those calls with the other members of my senior leadership team once a quarter to really give our customers in the region a handle on how we're performing on our key business indicators and meeting the goals of the strategic plan. And the other thing that I will do, it's been my biggest learning as administrator, and you see that in this last slide, and it's axiomatic. Any of you that probably have ever managed an organization probably can know this in your sleep, but the reality is that a good business strategy achieves nothing without the people and culture to make it happen. Say colloquially of folks, and there's that famous saying that says, strategy is great, but culture eats strategy for lunch, right? And so we've just put a tremendous amount of effort into culture at Bonneville. It starts with safety. Can't tell you how important that is. I think I've talked to you about that before, but boy, everything starts with safety. If your employees have good safety habits and they're willing to speak up if they see something that's making them nervous, that translates into everything else in your organization. It's just foundational to utility, I think, any organization safety. Big focus on management excellence, leadership, big focus on diversity and inclusion. And more, being a better, more responsive and agile business partner, as we focus on our commercial success. So those are the core elements of the strategic plan. My expectation is that over the next months, this thing will become very dog-eared and trashed as I sort of carry it around everywhere I go. I've said to folks, this is the central reference point for everything that Bonneville will be doing over the next 5 years. We'd like to get ourselves through 2023. Our expectation is right around the middle of the next decade. That'll probably be the time when things start heating up in terms of the next round of commercial negotiations, and we want to have Bonneville positioned much more competitively. We want customers to be confident in our capacity for cost management and financial strength, and we want our many other valued partners to believe that we really are meeting our commitments to be that engine of economic prosperity and environmental sustainability through a disciplined commercial organization. So I will stop there, and Mr. Chairman, if there's any other questions or comments, I'd love to take them.
All right, let's line up the questions, see what we've got. Who's first? Tom?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, Elliot, I liked where you started and ended the talk and everything in between, but we all have that shared interest in Bonneville as the engine of economic development. I think that really, historically, that's what it's been. I think in the future, our hope is it'll be that in the future. It's this great source of low-cost, carbon-free power that is going to be essential in the long-term future of the West. I mean, obviously, it's got these capabilities of ramping up, ramping down to balance large amounts of renewables. It essentially is a big battery. It stores power that's generated through the wind or solar. They can store it in the system and bring it out later during peak. I mean, it has these phenomenal capabilities that we don't get paid for. And so we have an economic problem now in those secondary markets. So I think, your first contract there with PGE is a great milestone. I mean, the future should be more of those, more recognition of those values to the Northwest and in California if we need to. It seems to me that at some point the West has to recognize that. We need to speed that up, and I appreciate your efforts in trying to do that.
Thank you. Yeah, and again, I thank you guys for your support on that. It's a lot of folks that help make that happen, so it's the right kind of partnership.
Thanks.
Quick comment. Thank you so much for coming, Elliot. It's always a pleasure to hear from you and your latest ideas. You talked a lot about costs, financial strategies, really to keep costs down, keep Bonneville competitive. These are the things that matter to the utilities that I speak to, of course. But I'd like to go back to your opening, which was really that holistic mission that is identified through the Northwest Power Act, and that is, like you say, the engine of economic prosperity and environmental sustainability. And Tom's question or comment kind of touched on this as well. Is there benefit in getting the region to not only focus on cost strategies, but also that value system that is so important to all of us, not only on the power side, but also the fish and wildlife side as well? And how is that something that you're looking at, and how do we as a region get that message across so that people do recognize that value, that dual value?
Well, I think that's a great question, and to me, I think our actions, speak to our commitment there. I think you could probably have folks in this situation who'd be talking about, radically gutting, fish and wildlife investments. I think they're very valuable. I think that we have an obligation, not only legally but morally, to continue to work to support fish and wildlife restoration in this region, to work with the tribes. We have huge trust and treaty responsibilities in that area. And I think if you look at the kind of money we're spending and probably intending to continue to support for a long time, it's a lot of dollars, and we're committed to continuing the partnerships. But we think of it as, in terms of the fish and wildlife area, for example, as kind of a biological investment portfolio, okay? And we're trying to maximize that value while working within some constraints, which means that if we're going to take on a new, say for example, some of the things we're looking at in spring operations, if that's going to be the new priority, well, what should come off the list? What's of less value, or what can we no longer afford? So I think we are trying to use a value approach and think of it from a value maximization side. So we see that the Fish and Wildlife Program as being central to, when we talk about environmental sustainability, that's probably the top of the list, right? But I think that discipline and the willingness to have the hard conversations about competitiveness and about some of the constraints is where we have to go. So this spring, this summer, we're going to start having that dialogue, as we go into spring operations and we take on new spill requirements. Our team and many of your folks in your states are beginning to engage in this process of how to rebalance the portfolio and how do we get the biggest value out of it while working with some constraints. So I think it's there. If you guys have ideas for other ways we can elevate that conversation more prominently, make sure everybody's engaged in it and willing to dig in, I'm wide open to suggestions.
Any other questions? Elliot Mainzer, I appreciate your advice today. It's extremely disappointing news that you bring for all of those folks who for decades have considered BPA an open checkbook and a bank to go withdraw from for every little request that they had. And now you're telling us that the golden goose is no longer going to lay all of the eggs that they wanted, but just a certain number a day. And that's disappointing to those folks who wanted that handout all the time. And I think it's maybe prudent that we take better care of the goose. And, appreciate you coming by.
Thanks for having me.
We'll be in recess for about 10-15 minutes.
Thank you.